Oxalate is this thing that's all over nature that plants make, and we're eating a lot of it. And interestingly, those of us in the field of health, public health, and nutrition know nothing about it, including me. And if you follow the health advice of our times, chances are you're eating a ton of this stuff, which is sort of weird if you realize that we've been using it as an industrial cleaner since the 1700s. It's used in big factories that make cottons and all this kind of stuff to bleach cottons, to prepare them for dyeing. It's used in photography printing. It's used to bleach wood, and leather, and just all kinds of industrial applications for it. And we use it even heavily in scientific research.
Hey, it's Dr. Rimka coming to you as promised, 4 o'clock. And the title I have is, are you in pain from all of these paleo superfoods? It's been a little bit of a thing that's been like a thorn in my side for, 7, 8, maybe 10 years, where I have to keep getting patients off these mega amounts of what they call superfoods, okay? Spinach, kale, almonds, the same 7 things that all the paleo people eat in outrageously excessive amounts. And I'm going to bring on who I consider the queen of one of these toxins that are in what we call these superfoods, supposedly, oxalates. And that would be Sally K. Norton. So she's who most of us have learned from. I have devoured countless hours of her podcasts, of her lectures. Some of her ancestral nutrition lectures are so bomb. You must go to her website, sallyknorton.com, and do the same. All right. So I'm waiting for her to hop on. Oh, Sally. Okay. Did you request and I didn't see it? My bad. You did. Wow. I was too distracted by my excitement. She's popping on, you guys. There you are.
I think. Can you see
me? I
hear
you. I can hear you. I can see you. Everybody else, you see her all okay?
There we go.
Make sure I think we're good.
All right.
Ooh.
Hey.
Hi. Okay, well, I got some. They're going to type in questions. As you know, this can be really chaotic when questions are popping up, to not be too distracted. This isn't your first time in the rodeo being interviewed, but it's the first time I've had a chance to talk with you. So thank you for coming on. I have watched, countless hours of you over the years. So thank you for the research, the time, energy you put into your lectures. And I'm one of those doctors that has benefited over the years of watching you all over the ancestral scene and watching your very honest and vulnerable exposure of what you went through and how maybe some of the diet dogma, which is hard to talk to food people about, might be wrong for themselves or some of their patients. So people can get very attached to food. So anybody who's made it be kind of their niche, much respect.
Yeah, I hung out in public health because that way I wouldn't have to tell anybody what to eat and go there. But here I am anyway.
Yeah, it's hard. People wonder why they get mad at doctors. They think they get mad at like all healthcare. And well, why don't they? Because when we do it, you don't listen, and we're frustrated, and it's exhausting. It's not very rewarding, to be honest. And I have to tell people the truth of that. I'm like, I'm in the alternative group, and I've been here my entire career. But there's a reason why physicians don't want to talk to you about what you eat, because it's hard, and you fight us. And it's very exhausting. So
yeah, people say they want advice, and then you tell them what you think, and they're like, "But I love spinach." Oh, what? You're supposed to. I don't know what you're supposed to be telling them. You didn't want an answer to your question? Come on.
There you go. There you go. Well, let's talk about. I call you the queen of oxalates. So, most of the people on here will probably know who you are, Sally. But why don't you give them a quick rundown of who is Sally K. Norton and why this website? I have given your website to I don't know how many hundreds of people in my career where I'm like, I know what an oxalate is. I can tell you this far, but if this is our real issue, I want you to go to the best in the field, and that's Sally K. Norton. So why don't you give them a little snippet about what an oxalate is and what you stand for and how you've been helping people?
Okay, well, oxalate is this thing that's all over nature that plants make, and we're eating a lot of it. And interestingly, those of us in the field of health, public health, and nutrition know nothing about it, including me. And if you follow the health advice of our times, your chances are you're eating a ton of this stuff, which is sort of weird if you realize that we've been using it as an industrial cleaner since the 1700s. It's used in big factories that make cottons and all this kind of stuff to bleach cottons, to prepare them for dyeing. It's used in photography printing. It's used to bleach wood, and leather, and just all kinds of industrial applications for it. And we use it even in heavily in scientific research. So scientists have their hands all over oxalates and have. I mean, when we were first learning about chemistry and how these different elements in the world come together into these molecules and create all these water and proteins and all this stuff. When we were figuring out chemistry, oxalate was one of the very first things we were figuring out and using to figure out other chemicals. So there's a long history of oxalates in science that has been weirdly utilized by human beings. We use oxalic acid, which is the parent compound, and which is a 2-carbon molecule, very small molecule. It has 4 oxygens on it, though. So you can imagine, well, it's bleaching wood and maybe oxygens. But the other talent this little molecule has is that it grabs minerals. It's a chelator of minerals because it's an acid that drops its hydrogen, its little proton, and has this negative charges that are attracted to things with positive charges, which are things like calcium and iron and magnesium and minerals, which you happen to have a lot of in your cells. Your cells need all these minerals as ions, and your bones, and so on. So we're eating this acid that's quite capable of cleaning your patio of the rust stains from your furniture. Takes the rust right out. You can strip the rust off of an engine. You can do great things with oxalic acid. And you eat a lot of it when you do spinach smoothies and spinach anything, and almond this and that, and even almond milk, which is really a dilute solution of oxalic acid. But that dilution apparently increases its toxicity because the little ion is so watery, and the water is what absorbs into your body from the digestive tract. It just flows right between the cells of the digestive tract. You don't need any kind of deliberate decision to absorb this oxalate or not. It just floats in the water. So the more diluted this oxalic acid is, the more it can get into your blood in a nice dilute way where it spreads out and is able to start messing up your minerals. And it has electromagnetic effects that mess up your membranes, that include your mitochondrial membranes, which is how you make energy in cells, and goes on and on. Basically, by eating this acid so much, and you're saying like in the paleo, it sort of surprises me how much it shouldn't, because I've been in the ancestral world since, I don't know, 25 years ago. I'm like, okay, this is my department. This is my world in nutrition. Nutrition is like Christianity. There's all kinds of sects. You can go to Lutherans, Methodists, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Pick your church, and so my nutrition church has been ancestral. Like, okay, how have humans eaten over the long haul, and what really is our original diet before refrigerators and trains and trucks and modern farming equipment? How did humans survive and thrive on the planet? That should be informative in terms of thinking about nutrition. But none of that has entered in academia anywhere. So anyway, if you think about ancestral, where we came from, you think about what was or wasn't technically possible to do. How did paleo cookbooks get away with giving you almond muffins as a paleo food? I never understood that. And it's because the only way you're going to sell a cookbook is to give people desserts and treats and breads, because we're all addicted to that bread, carb-based, grain-based foods. And we're so used to using bread as a functional food to deliver a sandwich or whatever, pizza and bread. And it's like we're big hooked on our culture around food. So in order to sell a cookbook, you got to do all these baked goods and chocolate. Oh, paleo is so great. You can have chocolate. They're bribing you. They're manipulating you with this idea. Let me tell you, almost all these superfoods that are high in oxalate are brand new to the human diet. They're all within the last 400 or 600 years. Many of them are brand spanking new. We didn't even have a chocolate bar until something like 1900 or 1890s. It's like a brand new invention, and people think you've got to have it to be healthy and robust and avoid Alzheimer's disease. That is a crock. That's just marketing.
Right. Yeah, that's, I see a lot of people that would come in with a lot of the, if you get when new, like paleo is kind of my bare minimum in my practice. Like if they're doing standard American diet, I'm like, okay, the paleo is our basic starting point. Like if you can't make that dietary shift, you can't be a patient with me. And then we move all the way into GAPS and Wall's protocol or keto or, carnivore, whatever the situation is, pretty much is just a consistently higher elimination of plants, right? But as I was doing that with people, and it became like they're only eating the same 10 things. I'm like, no, 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 no. You can't. And I always had spinach gone because I was lucky that I've been doing testing with Great Plains Labs for a very, very long time because of autism. And I did know about, I think, functional medicine, the autism crowd, and then therefore some ADHD, we know about, well, oxalate poisoning related to candida, and other things, and how ADHD is often misdiagnosed and it's oxalate poisoning, brain fog, and these are things. I'm like, it's actually oxalates. And if it's not a yeast infection, it's always because parents are unknowingly kind of poisoning their kids every day with a spinach, kale, berry, almond milk smoothie every day. And now suddenly the kid has attention issues. So I knew about it, luckily, because of that and the testing that Great Plains has been doing. So I'm like, I can test for your oxalates and we can see what's going on. And I would just treat it with, the calcium mag citrate binders and change the diet a little bit. It wasn't really until kind of the deep keto-vor stuff that I've been into for about 7 years where I really came across you, where oxalates were so much bigger than this small subpopulation of mental health issues that I was seeing. But again, I was seeing often oxalates being the cause of someone's depression, their brain fog, their ADHD, their anxiety. And when I brought that down, and it was secondary to usually a yeast infection in the gut or, something like that, or mold, all these symptoms would go away. And they didn't need treatment for anything. It was oxalates. I didn't know as much about the joint pain and the skin issues and, kidney stones and all the stuff that, like, so much more that you bring to the table on this, that so many people are suffering with. And so why don't you maybe tell the brief story of like yourself and how you came, because it can cause massive systemic, pain and fatigue outside of the brain aspect that I hyper focus on.
Yeah, the brain is, the cells of the nervous system are fairly sensitive to toxins compared to other cells. All cells don't like toxins. Immune cells are another one too. So these cells are particularly dependent on the fine tuning of their electrolyte control inside the cell. The management of calcium ions and so on is so critical to the function of nerves, muscles, and immune cells that anything that starts distressing that is going to distress them too. And then as individual cells and tissues start having distress, you get system-wide problems for many reasons. And one of them is because now you're messing up all the cell communications in the body, including hormonal communication. So you're messing up hormones, individual cell-to-cell self-knowledge, and nerve function. And you get this inflammatory situation for many reasons. Again, you get direct inflammation in a single cell, but you also start turning on the immune system chronically. But before you even do that, you're damaging the circulating immune cells in your bloodstream right after a meal. So one group down in Birmingham, the upcoming folks in a very seasoned group of researchers who are starting to retire now, they brought up some younger ones behind them who are doing some more interesting things. Even though in neurology, they're looking at the effects of a spinach smoothie. They published a study, I think it was 2020, or there was one in 2019 and one in 2020 that came out, a pair of studies looking at the effects of a spinach smoothie on the blood cells and the urine 40 minutes after the spinach smoothie, and saw in most subjects severe inflammation in these immune cells, turning them all in a pro-inflammatory metabolism, turning up the cytokines, turning up all this inflammatory drama. The nerves don't like all that cytokines and drama. And so the brain gets into this neuroinflammation. In addition to the electrolyte disturbance within the cells, now you have cytokine storms and these kind of metabolic things just acutely after the meals. But then that acute spike in oxalate that comes in after almond bread or spinach smoothie causes new deposits of crystals to form. See, when oxalate grabs a calcium molecule and it encounters an area in the body that where there's cell vacuoles hanging around or cell debris because cells have just been injured or worn out or just old, that's where they start precipitating out into crystals that form deposits in the body. So you have this acid that comes in that steals your minerals in your blood and tissues and cells and your food even before it gets into the bloodstream. And then you've got this electrolyte disturbance, and then you have this deposition of crystals because the quantity in any given meal, it's just a little bit too high. It's enough hanging around where you get these crystals forming. So it's like having asbestosis forming anywhere in the body. Anywhere, can be the brain, tendons, fascia, bones, bone marrow, and so on. That creates more chronic inflammation because now you've got this little garbage, nanocrystals and microcrystals accumulating in the body continues to be provocative to the immune system. The immune system continues to want to have this stuff gone. And so then you get more chronic inflammation. So you end up with a lot of neuro symptoms, bad sleep, and mood problems because you have all these layers of inflammation continuing to pile on with each other. And you've got nerves that don't have as much control over their electrolytes as they need to have. So it's a pretty messed up situation coming from things we're eating, we're thinking are healthy.
Right. That's the thing that gets hard for people. They think they've been doing the right thing. They're following, popular culture saying almonds, spinach, kale. What are the other ones? It's the same berries.
Well, it's really not kale so much. There's
good.
4 greens. So getting that right is important. There's only 4 leafy greens that are really the biggest problems. And one of them hardly anyone eats. So there's spinach, but worse than spinach is beet greens and red-stemmed chard. They're worse than spinach. And then there's white-stem chard, which is a little bit like spinach light. So really you just chard, beet greens, and spinach. And sorrel, which nobody in the U.S. eats much of. It's like a little fancy thing weird gardeners and chefs use. But really, you're just talking beet greens, Swiss chard, and spinach. But they're so universally popular for the last 100 years, actually. And then lately, Swiss chard is like getting to be as popular as kale. Kale, the kales vary. There's many forms of kale. Most of them are pretty on the low side. But compared to spinach, we're talking like a whole decimal point difference. Eat kale if you must. I don't know why you would, but eat kale.
Well, there's
don't
quite a
eat those little,
like
the baby green, like the spinach mixes, or the salad mixes. They'll often have little beet greens and little Swiss chard greens and things in there because they give it color. And you always got spinach because the dark leafy greens have been promoted from this idea that we need certain phytotoxins.
Right.
Let's
back up and say this. So people who, I have the hardest time when a patient comes in and they're doing that. They're eating this. This is how they think, I eat really great. And then they rattle off all this stuff. Mm-hmm. They're hardly eating any animal protein. Like I'll have a 55-year-old woman who's maybe eating 30 grams a day. I'm like, what? And she's eating all these things and she's thinking she's doing great. But of course, she's got 20 pounds she can't lose. She's depressed and she's tired all the time. Okay. So then when I have to do that thing about giving them the note on oxalates, I mean, their minds get really blown here. Like, what do you mean? Mm-hmm. And you're arguing around, but how can a plant be bad for you? And I, have to go through that explanation. Like, not everything made out there is actually good for us. And isn't even supposed to eat it. And nobody wants to die, actually. Like, the plants fight back. And this is the mechanism. This is a mechanism. So if people don't understand what an oxalate is, like it was fancy oxalic acid, but it's like the plant's attempt to stab you away kind of from eating it.
And we've had to tame plants and cultivate them to make them edible. If you were just freewheeling and hiking in the woods, it'd be very hard to find lunch in the woods. And if you sent your nephew out into the garden to go eat your bushes, I think somebody would arrest you for doing that because you shouldn't have your kid eating these random plants because they're toxic. You wouldn't let them eat the bushes or the trees or the weeds in the woods. Like, wait, we have to identify that before you put it in your mouth. Don't people realize that we're doing that? Because plants are universally toxic. We happen to be getting away with eating some without immediate death and incorporated them into our cultures and added this food. Plants are like pleasure foods. They add all the spice and texture and color and so on and diversity, and you can kind of mix it up by adding plants, and you infinitely mix them up, and then spices add a lot of interest too. So it's some excitement in the plant world. But some of that excitement's a little too exciting for me because it's pretty toxic. And we forget that we're working with toxic materials, and yet nutrition is completely asleep on the fact that plants are inherently have to be toxic to survive in nature. That to the point where we don't even say there's an upper limit on them. You can eat as much of any plant as long as it's a plant as you want, which makes zero sense from a biology standpoint. Never made sense.
I love that you said that. I love that. You know, I don't know if you've figured this out yet. I've heard you talk about it, right? It's like, do we have any insight? Do you have any insight? Does the research show anything as to why some people have a harder time clearing oxalates eventually than others, right? It's like we're all probably consuming, you know, so one thing I want everybody to know, yes, they're in plants, but also we make oxalates as a part of normal metabolism. Citric acid cycle, we make so it is a part of some of it, you know, this 30% is what we're making, and it doesn't, you know, like we make all kinds of stuff inside of us, hydrogen peroxide and other things that we deal with, and it's a part of our normal metabolism. But then there's like some reason, some people through broken detoxification or just overload, have you figured out anything? It's like, well, I don't know why, but these people can't seem to clear it.
What the science says is that we can really tolerate about 25 milligrams of oxalate in our urine a day. That's what we're built to handle, 25. And the body makes about 12. So you get to eat about 13 milligrams translates into about 150 milligrams of oxalate in your food. So we're built to tolerate on a day-to-day basis about 150 milligrams according to the kidney research experts. 150 milligrams is, I don't know, let's see, 12 spinach leaves or something. Like, it's not that much.
Yeah.
So this business that some people are better than others, it's more like, who are these superpower people who manage to get to old age without arthritis, back pains, skin problems, digestive problems, kidney problems, kidney stones? I mean, there aren't that many people who are escaping the kind of damage. I mean, arthritis, osteopenia, osteoporosis, dementia, weaker bone, you name it. I mean, everything we think of as old age is happening to all of us because we're all eating outside the bounds of that. And the other thing we're doing is we're doing that year round. In the past, we had a thing called winter. We didn't have the refrigeration was your back porch or your, the back end of the igloo. I mean, you just didn't have an ability to eat raspberries and almonds year round. When I was growing up, almonds were so expensive and special compared to people's incomes that you spared I had somebody come from Europe on Continental Airlines with a little half-ounce of smoked almonds that were so wonderful and precious. You save that and give that as a special gift to somebody because, look at these almonds. We'd have a few of them in the toe of the stocking at Christmas and a few of them scattered on the bean casserole at Easter. End of almonds,
holidays. I remember that even as a kid. For me, it was like kind of Christmas and Thanksgiving because they were very expensive.
But now you can dig out on them all the time because industry has figured out how to make them cheaper, use big industrial methods, wipe out half of California and its water so we can plant all these trees so people can have almonds all the time. But that is just a brand spanking new thing. So is dark chocolate. I mean, when I was growing up, nobody liked dark chocolate. We've all been convinced that we adore it now, but this is pretty new. It's only been 25 years where dark chocolate is a thing. It's new.
I know, because it's that anandamide. We're just not having as much fun in life anymore, I think. I think we don't have as connection. We don't touch as much. Families aren't sleeping in the same bed. I really do think it's something to do with that, right?
In the whole nuclear
that bliss molecule, we don't have it.
We don't have it, right? With the television came to replace people.
Yeah.
In the 1950s.
And the TV
really.
dinner.
After World War II, World War II really geared up mass production in a big kind of way. And the post-World War II culture is more and more about stuff and entertainment through big media than it is getting out your fiddle, having a dance around the fire. Like doing stuff that you used to do as communities is gone now. You have to go to the theater and have pay to have entertainment. You can't just hang out and tell ghost stories around the fire. That's not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I call it like
our culture has just gotten more and more away. I mean, it was bad enough. The nuclear family was bad enough. And then after World War II, we also sent women to work. And now families are raising children with no adults at home, which is another level of isolation and alienation that where there's a lot of longing in our souls for something more. And we're filling it with lipstick and hairdos and clothes and bad food and using food more and more and more and more. Food is how we cope emotionally. Food is how we celebrate every little thing. Food symbolism is more than it's ever been. And yet its quality is the worst it's ever been.
Yeah. I do think we are using food for connection, and we're missing this vital nutrient called connection that the culture has stripped away for all of the reasons you just said. And it makes sense why people want that comfort, and they're connecting with themselves in front of a screen, which makes it even go on and on. So the almond, and they think, well, I'm doing better because I'm gluten-free, right? And I'm even the almond muffined and the almond flour pizza or cauliflower crust pizza. Like, yeah. And those people do actually feel better for a couple years because they have removed one toxin that they are having a problem with, and then they re-poison themselves by overloading on another toxin. So, which oxalates is one of many out there that, but you know, this is it. Would you say oxalates are more to you common than, you know, phytic acid and lectins?
Well,
like,
it's
where do
more
you see it?
profound. I think the lectin issues, they really gang up on each other. All these plant compounds cause some degree of gut damage. And the more of them you eat together, the more they just continue to gang up on you. But oxalate is unique in that it's in so many foods that are so popular, whereas the lectins, you know, basically to really ruin yourself on lectins, you have to eat undercooked beans a lot or just really overdo the whole wheat flour and stuff like that, where you've got the combination of lectins plus the fiber and the other gut damaging things like the phytates, which is really, the phytic acid is really interfering with calcium absorption, but so is oxalate in an even bigger way. And those other ones you can deal with. You can get rid of phytic acid by soaking your grains for a day and then cooking them well. With lectins, you need to soak your beans like 3 days and then cook them like pressure cook heat to really disarm them. But a lot of people don't know. I mean, I didn't know that I couldn't slow cook my beans. I was in my vegan years, I was using a slow cooker to prepare beans. That ended my gut health permanently, doing that. And I didn't know. I mean, I had started to develop this, really, it came on as post-infectious IBS, but I had been that whole summer been doing the slow cooked beans, you know, set them up at night, let them run overnight, and then have them for breakfast as a vegan. And that fall, it was the Friday before Labor Day, I was out at a restaurant with friends and I got a bad reaction to the food. And forever since, that was 1990, ever since, I've had 32 years of gut problems, thanks to really the beans. It looks like post-infectious IBS, but it was really, I had lectin and oxalated myself into oblivion. So they're all bad news. And if you deal with the oxalate problem, you can deal with everything else a lot better. If you try to do everything else first and ignore the oxalates, you won't get anywhere. As long as you have oxalate in the picture, you're going to end up with chronic infections you can't recover, gut problems you can't recover, and all kinds of other things related to chronic inflammation and autoimmune type issues and loss of connective tissue integrity, which can include weird fascia problems and fibromyalgia and arthritis and calcified tendons. Sometimes they're called bone spurs, things like that. You're just going to have all kinds of other problems if you can get this. Also, liver, your poor liver. People forget everything you absorb from your food goes straight to the liver, and the liver makes oxalate. It doesn't get rid of it. You can't detox oxalate. It's not liver enzymes that get rid of oxalate. It's your kidneys who take them out of your blood later. But first, the spinach and the almonds flood your liver with oxalic acid. And the liver is great at handling this by being able to make umpteen amounts of glutathione. until it can't anymore. And then you end up with chemical sensitivities and inability to tolerate alcohol, and you end up trashing your liver function. And then that same oxalic acid that floods the sinusoids of the liver moves up the inferior vena cava to the heart, which is just, 2 inches up from the liver, if that, to the heart. And then the heart has to pump it into the lungs for oxygen. Here goes oxalic acid from your liver to your heart to your lungs. And then it goes back to the other side of your heart. And then it gets pumped through your vascular system, all your arteries and capillaries. And the capillaries have high pressure, and they push this juice in your blood out into the tissues, leaving just the cells. And then on the vein side of the capillaries, you resorb this. So you're actually able to spread oxalate through all your critical organs and most of your tissues before the blood gets cleaned out by the kidneys. So
that is horrifying. That whole picture you just did, I'm over here like, oh God, like I'm horrified. Wow, I need a minute.
It's the most basic
somebody
review
asked
of
the question, how long you were vegan? They asked, I saw that. How long were you vegan?
How long was I vegan? So first I was vegetarian. I read Frances Moore LePay's book, Diet for a Small Planet, right out of high school. And it turned a whole generation of us into bleeding heart vegetarians. And so I was that until a friend of mine subscribed to Veggie Journal for me, and then they were promoting John Robbins' book, Diet for a New America. And on my last dime, I ordered that. I pre-ordered that book and read every word and underlined it and believed him, and immediately thought, well, all milk is pus. Can't have yogurt anymore. And eggs are terrible. Can't have my eggs anymore. So I dropped my daily yogurt and my eggs, and very quickly, I never put it together. And then I was 8 years that. So it was 8 years vegetarian, then 8 years vegan. But interestingly, when you look back, you're like, yeah, and I couldn't walk up and down stairs without intense knee pain. Now, I'm telling you, I'm like 25 years old, and I'm having terrible knee arthritis. And that got me more serious about doing yoga, because if you bend your knees real tight, you can work on the symptoms. You can get rid of some of these symptoms of oxalate poisoning and bad diet by doing things like massage and yoga and so on. And your lifestyle starts medicating your problems, and you think, it's not my food because it helps. And since the oxalate symptoms can come and go and be in different body parts and are not consistently the same, so you don't really figure out that it's your diet doing it easily.
I think that's important for people. Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, because this is very tricky with how pervasive oxalates can be and how different it looks. There has been several questions. People are saying, it's one of them. So are oxalates related to chronic fatigue syndrome? Are oxalates involved in autoimmune issues? The answer would be yes, 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 and yes, and all the yeses, right? Which makes it very interesting and difficult to figure out, right? You're saying that's, I think, the most important thing, because when somebody does find out, let's say like low-ox grandma on here, they're so ecstatic with this is an answer, and they're getting relief. They're singing it, from the mountaintop. And I think for some people, it seems like, well, really? It can do all that? And it's like, yeah, it can do all that,
Well, and it makes sense if you understand what this little acid can do. If you knew anything about cell physiology, which most people don't. Right. But just the calcium ion, this is a little charge, 2 positive charges on one little calcium molecule. One little, tiny little calcium is being used by your cell to organize its business. It's the messenger where the endoplasmic reticulum, which is an inner, subcellular organelle, will release little bits of calcium ions in a different part of the cell over in this membrane area, and tells the membrane, oh, we need some more glucose, so we should do this or that. Let's make some of this. Or tells the nucleus, let's read this part of the genome, because we got to start making more insulin or doing this or that. Winter's coming, let's do this. Because the body's just reading the environment, and every cell is being asked to do different things. So in order to know what it's supposed to be doing right now, the cell tells itself with calcium ions. Well, once you have oxalic acid getting into cells, you're messing up the cell's inner communication. But if it's already in there or near a cell, it's depolarized, it's messing with the structure of the membranes. Okay, so there's an inner leaflet and an outer leaflet. Like there's 2 layers of fats that make up a membrane. And the certain things are supposed to be on the inside will flip to the outside when an oxalate molecule is near. And when the immune system sees them on the outside, it says, oh, that cell's got to go. We're going to kill that cell because the structure is telling it, oh, that cell's damaged. We got to get rid of that cell. But in the meantime, that cell is damaged. Like membranes, you got to realize all of the biochemical reactions of life are occurring mostly in and around proteins that are in membranes. And those proteins function depend on the right fats in the molecule, right fats in the membrane. And those fat structures are being disturbed by the just nearby. An oxalate ion or an oxalate nanocrystal is the most toxic form. Is a nano means uber small, like smaller than a cell, smaller than a speck on a cell. They're really little, and they have the most surface area to cause the most electromagnetic damage to cell membranes. And of course, the mitochondria is your energy powerhouse. It's making all your energy to run everything. Those are getting damaged directly in an inflammatory way. And their ability to produce ATP goes down because of that, but also because oxalate sits on these enzymes that produce ATP, both in glycolysis and in the electron transport chain. There's different enzymes that work with like pyruvate size molecules where the oxalate sits there and blocks the pyruvate from getting onto the enzyme. So it blocks enzymes of energy production. It messes up mitochondria and messes up membranes. So your ability to have enough energy and enough wherewithal as a cell to replace yourself when you get old and to do the work of the cell gets seriously damaged by oxalate. So any problem can occur because of that. You no longer have enough energy to produce enough proteins and so on to make a new cell. So you just have to start making scar tissue. You end up with fibrosis because you got to hold those tissues together. You can't make enough cells to make those tissues whole and happy. So you make more scar tissue. The fibroblasts keep making, so there's all kinds of compensations where you don't get symptoms from the loss of minerals. Your bones are thinning, and then suddenly you have an easy break and like, oh, I just stepped off this ramp and my ankle's broken. We just think, oh, that's just me as a klutz. No, it's you having been eating too many potatoes and almonds for too many years, and now your bones are thinned and you're suddenly at risk. You had no symptoms of bone thinning. You won't have any symptoms of these crystals forming, but you might be like me and have back problems since you're young, have fatigue problems, have concentration problems, end up with a sleep disorder, end up with, basically disability from sweet potatoes. I mean, when I quit veganism, things went to heck for me. I was bad enough when I went vegan, and now I couldn't do the stairs, and I had to do yoga and had to do these things to compensate. And I thought I was okay. But when I quit the veganism, I added sweet potatoes, which is high oxalate food. Oh man, I developed this little thing on my head where I couldn't work on my hair without pain. So I went to the dermatologist to have him take it off. And I said, I'm getting these little black specks on my skin. What's that? I'm in my mid-30s. He goes, oh, that's age spots, laughing at me. I'm like, age spots? And before that, I had developed all these fine wrinkles right after I put on a sweet potato. Like, I was aging quickly in my mid-30s when I went from vegan to sweet potatoes. But I never put this together with my diet. And I got through it. Like, okay, so then I went to the guy with the chelation and the vitamin C IVs and all this stuff, and we put me on Cortef to bring back my adrenal glands, and now I can handle stress and I can work again and work full-time now. For a long time, I couldn't work full-time because I just didn't have enough energy. I just couldn't do more than 35 hours a week. I couldn't do the 80 hours a week that academics like to do. And that I restored it. I propped myself up with vitamins and the Cortef and things, and I was seemingly functional, but I ended up having to kneel. My back was getting so bad. I couldn't sit, so I kneeled on the floor to write research grants. And I started bleeding so badly with these little tiny fibroids that I needed a hysterectomy, and I ended up having to quit my career completely. And I didn't recover from the hysterectomy, which was not a pretty picture. They cut me open. They found loose blood all through the pelvis, endometrial scarring on the colon. And he said to me, we're on epidural, so we're having conversations with my whole belly wide open. He's like, your ovaries are really a mess. We're going to have to take both of them. Because the deal was, please leave an ovary. Please don't take them all. They're like, I need some hormones. And he's like, no, they got to go. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I've had these problems for like 4 years. You think it's been 4? He says, no, like forever. Your ovaries are messed up. So all this is like fibrosis. Wow. And this mess in there, I clearly draw back to the oxalate problem, because later on after that surgery, I couldn't come back. I just was something, I couldn't function. I could hardly read. So my doctor couldn't figure it out. Like, I'm trying to figure out my hormones, get them right, because now I don't have ovaries, I don't have any hormones. And he sent me to sleep doctor because he says, you look great, your numbers look great, all your tests look great, you look younger and better than any other of my patients. So he sent me to sleep doctor. My brain was waking up 29 times an hour, and I was too tired to know that. And so I went on this safari, like, what is poisoning my brain that I can't sleep? And I thought it was SIBO. So I treated myself for SIBO, even though the tests said negative, and tried everything I could and got on kiwis every day to fix the constipation, because it had to be the constipation. And my arthritis got worse, and my stiffness and connective tissues got worse. I could tell because I do this hot Bikram yoga, and I was getting worse and worse and worse every week. This is 2013. And I'm suddenly having this insight that the kiwis and the oxalate in the kiwi was related to my arthritis. Now, I started having arthritis when I was 12.
When did the oxalate thing start? Because you really weren't putting it together totally yet. But when did you go, oh,
No, there was this discovery with the kiwi
okay,
causing the arthritis. I was like, oh my God, I had such bad arthritis in my 20s during the vegan years. I had days where I could barely use my hands. They would be so weak and swollen and sore. I didn't have the strength in them to turn the key in the knob of my parents' house when I was 19. It was not, and that was even before I went vegan. I was just vegetarian, but happily into fruits and beet greens and all that, just because I liked fruits and vegetables. I was a food geek. And I see now that my dad being raised on beet greens in the summer was enough for him to end up with so many problems that probably were from oxalate, just because we eat too much of it as a culture. You wouldn't credit his knee pain and his sudden need for cervical surgery and have his neck fused and his back pain and his various things to that. But especially when you combine a high oxalate diet with a high sugar diet, and then today's seed oils and the salad dressings and all that.
I was going to
It's
ask
a
about
really
that,
good.
like in terms of on the membrane, what you know in terms of distinguishing that cell membrane is supposed to be a lot of, a right ratio of omega-3s, and we're putting so many omega-6 seed oils, really low rancid
Well, and
in
plus
there.
the
And
trans
does it make
fats.
it worse? Does it make the
Yes,
oxalates just do
it's
like,
got to, because you can't get your membranes to work right when they have these elongated fatty acids that form because of these weird fats that we're eating, too many omega-6s, and then also you've got trans fats. And these are different. It's the shape. Each of these molecules, fat chemistry is fairly complicated. And each of the molecules have a physical shape. They're not like these little logs. The saturated fats are like little logs that will line up like a pile of trees on a truck, right? But the unsaturated and elongated fats are all crooked and zigzaggy. They look more like my hair than they do a log. They're just all over the place in their shape. And so that has a huge effect on the membrane fluidity and membrane electricity and the proteins that are in the membranes that are doing the functional work of, bringing in and moving ions and materials in and out of cells and producing materials. So the fats make a big difference on your vulnerability. But see, I think that's where, when you recover from a problem of having accumulated oxalate because you've been living on certain high oxalate foods for 6 months or 60 years, either one, the people who recover, I think, smoothly in some ways, aren't completely broken, are the ones who haven't been living on junk food. I think if you've been living on junk food and use the stuff in the middle of the store to celebrate with on Super Bowl Sunday and every other day of the year, there's always an excuse. It's somebody's birthday.
right.
Your boss was mean today. Your car got something wrong with it today. I mean, there's always a reason to reward yourself with a
Right.
potato chip.
Sure.
So people who do that tend to just do that all the time. Use crackers and breakfast cereals and
Yeah.
salad dressings that are garbagey foods. I think they have a harder time recovering from the oxalate poisoning than those of us who were like cooking our garden produce and making homemade apple pies and doing, real food using real ingredients. But even in our generation, our parents started using margarine and Crisco oil when they did cookies and cakes and pies too. So they're almost as bad as the ones in the store.
Yeah. That's when it started, like the 80s for me, you know, like I'm 49. And so like there was that shift suddenly. My mom, all the butter went away and this margarine happened. And, you know, because it was supposedly the low fat, high grain thing is what happened in the 80s. She switched from like the 4 basic food groups, or we ate a ton of meat. I did have some potatoes and vegetables, but we were a very meat based kind of house, and everything was in season because that's how it was in the 70s. And then there was this
Yeah.
shift. And it was the TV dinner time and Hot Pockets and loaf butter. I can't believe it's not butter. No, I remember.
Well, and we really had the push
changing.
for corn oil margarine in the 70s.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
big push for that. But each generation had it. Like they started around the Depression era of pushing oleo margarine, and it came out white like Crisco, and they sent you a little color packet with it. You could push the color in and make it look like butter. And that was pushed as the frugal thing to do. So you were a responsible American if you're frugal and you use this frugal fat instead of that, you know, rich, fancy butter, you know. And so we were already talking people out of butter and lard, which was the preferred fats. And so my mother would keep lard for pie crust, but she would always cut it with Crisco. And sometimes she would use butter, but she would cut it with margarine because that was the frugal thing to do. So even she's 94, 93. And, you know, she was also using crab fats. And then the coupon era came on back in the 60s, where you just bought whatever the coupon was for. The new Life cereal, the new this cereal, the new this. You know, you just put your whatever was the cheapest thing. And so we have this mentality like, oh, big corporation, give me a coupon and I'll buy your garbage food because I'm saving money. And we're just not actually being foodies and thinking about the quality of our food, and haven't now. We've allowed big industry and marketing to dictate what we do with food for 100 years. Yeah. So it's not just
really sad, where kids don't even know where food comes from, and like they think
or know the
those mini
difference. Like
carrots
they
are
couldn't
actual
name
carrots.
the fruit in the produce department.
Right. Yeah. It's really, it's kind of stunned me. So there's a lot of questions in there, you guys. We're probably not going to be able to answer everything, but where you can get a lot of your questions answered is her website. So sallyknorton.com. I'll make sure it's in the description when I repost this. This will be saved. It'll also go to YouTube later. You have a lot of, so you actually see clients, right?
I do.
So you can hire her and she can help you. See, if you actually want to usually heal, you usually need to do that.
Most people need a personal touch, and the quick and easy way to get started is to come to one of my group meetings, which, you know, are a little few and far between. There's only like 4 or 5 of them a month, and I keep them sort of small so people can participate, and they get a lot of handouts.
You do like group Zooms, so like a group Zoom, like a pay to be on a Zoom, and then they can get a little bit of knowing.
Then they get like my handouts about, you know, supports you can do, and you know they get a lesson on like with slide, kind of explaining all this science and explaining the data and the food as much as you can in a short single meeting. And then you can get a link to schedule a session with me for personal consultations, which usually there's like a 2-month wait.
Right. And on her website, you guys, it is an abundant amount of free resources. Just like, you know, like people sometimes I'm like, did you read the thing? Did you watch the video? Like there's so much free stuff. Free means you got to put some energy into it. She put energy into it. There's a crap ton of videos, podcasts. I mean, PowerPoints going over this stuff. There's a whole section called science. You want to know the science? Click on it. And the one part of your website I've given more people to, because I can't stand a recipe, Sally. Can't stand it. But I'm like, here you go. Click. You have all these free recipes for people.
Yeah, and I have a better set of them in my PDF. There's a PDF cookbook out there with like 180 recipes in it. And and then that answers a lot of questions, you know.
Right.
What are low oxalate foods? Well, here's like 60 vegetable recipes. Here's what to do with a turnip, what to do with a rutabaga, how to cook cabbage, whatever. But, you know, you really need meat in a healthy diet. You need good fats. You need to get yourself so you can digest butter and animal fats, and hopefully you can still eat eggs. One of the big problems with oxalate is you're so deranging your immune system and your digestive tract and your sensitivity you've trained your immune system to be in hyperinflammation all the time when you're eating oxalate all the time. And you start to become reactive to all kinds of things. And you can lose your tolerance for eggs or all kinds of things. Hopefully you can still do dairy. This is probably the two biggest things that are going on is people are afraid to eat dairy anymore because we have all this gut problems and we're not handling it like we used to be able to handle it. And so you cut out your main source of calcium. And without calcium in your food, you're going to absorb more of this oxalic acid into your blood. And we're just eating these high oxalate foods at a level and a routineness so more frequently and so more around the year calendar all the time that we're way bypassing that 150 milligram, 200 milligram limit to what we can handle in food. That's someone with a healthy gut. If you got gut inflammation, you can't even handle the normal 200 milligrams of oxalate a day. Most people who are doing these modern foods are eating in the thousands of milligrams of oxalate. So they're like eating
So let me
5
back
to 10
up something.
times.
Can I back this up from all the questions I'm seeing? I don't know if you're seeing them, and I know everybody wants their questions answered. I get it. But I'm going to back up what she just kind of said, I think. And so you can please correct me. So kind of the short net, one way people are ending up with an increased amount of food sensitivities and inability to handle and eat things now, because people are asking, why do I seem to be sensitive to all these foods now? Why am I sensitive to oxalates? Why can't I have dairy now? Why can't you maybe poisoned yourself too long with eating thousands of milligrams of oxalates a day? You've irritated your intestinal tract and created immune derangement, broken down mitochondria, done a bunch of stuff. So now when you eat foods like good dairy that's good for you, butter, other things, you're having reactions because the gut lining is even more damaged, leaking things in. So we're having, proteins leak, all kinds of reasons why we have immune response to things getting into the blood we shouldn't. Did I say that basically well enough in a recap?
Yeah. I think the whole picture on the immune system is it's more than just, even though much of your immune system sits at the gut, because that's the major entry point for everything in your body. And they're standing there as sentinels and as communicators telling the body, hey, this is what's going on today. Here's what's coming. Oh, look, oxalate all over again. Oh boy, look out, guys. And so the immune system's on hyper alert that way. But as I said earlier, you damage those mitochondria in those circulating monocytes in the blood. They're putting out cytokines and pro-inflammatory messages. You keep your whole immune system in this pro-inflammatory state all the time. It's just in this fighting mode all the time. It's like, oh my God, and so you can start reacting to anything. And so the sensitivity, though, there's another thing that you brought up about, oh, I'm sensitive to oxalates now. Well, oxalate is not an allergy. You're not having allergic reactions to oxalate. It's a toxicity. And here's a big thing that is not understood well. So it's important to take a minute to just think about this. We've filled ourselves up with nanocrystals and microcrystals of oxalate in our bone marrow, bones, tendons, brain, wherever. Thyroid gland, really common spots would be your eyes and thyroid gland. Now you quit eating it and the body's like, woo, oh my gosh, yes, all right. Now, so this is an interesting thing that we haven't studied. This flip from the body having to do, like, oh man, more oxalate. Let's put it over here, Fred. Fred, you hold it over here. Yeah, good luck. We're saving, like we can't leave it in the blood. As a body system, we can't leave this toxic cleaning acid floating around in the blood and then bombing the poor kidneys and wiping out the kidneys. So we've got to protect the kidneys to keep us all alive as cells in the body. We're dependent on the kidneys. And we got to not wreck the vascular system because every tissue in the body is being maintained and cared for with blood vessels. And if you let oxalate hang out in the blood, you're going to wreck the capillary beds. We can't let that happen. So I think there's a certain amount of deliberate, what we call sequestration, where the body is actually holding on to oxalate, waiting for winter when you quit eating all these summery high oxalate foods. It's summery because human beings in the winter used to survive on fishing and hunting and eat primarily a carnivore diet for several months every year, which would be your annual oxalate unloading. I think historically the body knows when you're eating a high oxalate diet. It has a way of reading your diet and when it's not eating a high oxalate diet. And if you stay consistent for only 3 days, the cells re-outfit themselves with different kinds of activities and now start like trying to get rid of this stuff they've been wanting to get rid of. It's like, my attic is going to fall in my head. I can't wait to unload this junk out of my attic. I got to get it gone. And so, you turn on this problem where now you're filling your bloodstream up with oxalic acid from your tissues when you stop eating oxalates. So your levels of oxalate go up in the bloodstream and the urine and kidneys after you quit eating it. So if you've got high levels in your blood for a month and then you go eat some keto chocolate carnivore cake or whatever it is, and you add a big load of oxalate to a river overflowing of oxalate from inside, you make yourself so toxic because now you've really overwhelmed that barrel of capacity. You've overshot the capacity because the body thought it was winter and it wasn't expecting this load of oxalate coming. It didn't see this coming. So if you've been kind of low oxalate and then you suddenly throw in a smoothie for, your cheat day or whatever, you're going to be sensitive, all right, but it's not because you've developed an allergy to it. It's because your whole system is trying to detox these oxalates by moving them out of the tissues, and you're interfering with that exit process by adding more through the diet. Does that make sense? Is that confusing?
That's perfect. That makes perfect sense, right? And so people are asking, like, in terms of sometimes the discomfort people go through when they transition into low carb diets and they're trying to get ketogenic or they try to go, carnivore, and the things that happen and why sometimes I have to advise my patients to slow down because they are releasing faster than they can clear or that they can handle the discomfort from. So I know, and I've learned that from you, sometimes you really need to wait. We don't want to go zero from 2,000 milligrams of oxalate a day to suddenly zero. That might be too much on the system to handle what's about to come out of the body.
Yeah, because it's a very sharp signal. I mean, it's a very abrupt shift. It says the body, oh, no oxalates, no oxalates. And I think that more recent smoothie that you had last week before you quit is in a more loosey-goosey place in the body. Like, I think it takes time for the oxalates to settle deep down into these granuloma formations and other tucking away and insulating process that the body does to try to make these crystals not give you any symptoms. They all get wrapped up in dead DNA and dead white cells and end up migrating toward the bones. And so that's in deep storage. And the deep storage stuff takes a little while to come out, but it prevents you from having symptoms. But if you just suddenly go from last week I was eating a smoothie every day to this week I'm carnivore, that's a strong change that tells the body, and so you might have, this is just a theory that the more recent stuff can stir up faster. I don't know. Nobody's really studied this. It's really based on clinical observations of how it seems to be working with people. But there's no one way this works. There's no one single answer. Every one of us is a unique expression of this problem. So there's no right or wrong way for the body to manage this. It's going to do what it can do to protect your life the best it can and to keep you from having symptoms. But some of us have way ignored the symptoms in our bodies at a level because you can't piece this together unless you really have a deep education in oxalates, which nobody has. Nobody you can turn to. This is the reason I decided to do this work, was because not a single soul can go to any health provider I know. At least they couldn't before I started squawking about it publicly and online. You couldn't go get it. No one could tell me that I was having these problems because I was eating sweet potatoes every day. I mean, the sleep doctor just gives you various drugs. It says, well, let's try this one, let's try this one, let's try this one. And you do that for 3 years. And then you see what happened to me. It was like, okay, the kiwi, which is high oxalate food, taught me that this arthritis was related to my healthy diet. And I was like, this was very disturbing news to me because I had suffered so greatly with arthritis. Arthritis is horrible. And I had these other problems. So I'm kind of resenting having to do this oxalate thing for my arthritis when I have a sleep problem, which is ruining my life. I can't work. So I have to do that plus fix my sleep problem. I was like, oh, crap, because I was thinking of all my problems as separate problems. Yeah. I didn't know all of it was oxalate poisoning. Like, I have 50 things wrong with me. I thought there were these different problems, like SIBO was one problem. No, it turned out by going low oxalate seriously and doing it well, I started being able to read again. It was clear I was sleeping again. My feet got really good for the first time in my whole life. And like all kinds of weird stuff. Just by quitting the sweet potatoes, I was like blown away. And yet, when I first had tried it 4 years earlier, I could not tell when I ate the sweet potatoes, I didn't necessarily feel worse. In fact, sometimes I felt better. And that's because by putting some oxalate back in your diet, you slow down the clearing process, which has symptoms that go with it. So the healing process has these waves of symptoms. And so it's very hard to tell from your diet. So people would be inherently skeptical because, well, couldn't we tell? No. Most diseases are silent. Most diseases don't have symptoms. You don't know when you have high blood pressure, typically.
Yeah. You
You
don't know a
don't know
kidney
when you have
stone is
cancer.
making. Yeah, you don't know until like, oh gosh, what's happened? And that's been there a long time, right? You don't feel it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you guys have set a website. We'll do that. I'll
Yes,
post it in there.
granulomas are related to oxalate, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. Everything they've asked, I'm like, yes. I just want to answer. The answer is yes. Chronic fatigue, thyroid. They've said yes, all of it. And you know, it's
Many,
really.
many
I'm going to
years.
tell you this little story. Kind of ironic, I think. I never noticed oxalate dumping. Like I don't know. I don't think I've ever had that. Right? That's what I say. I'm like, I don't know. I never had these rashes people talk about or whatever. I mean, yeah, I have aches and pains, whatever. You know, and I've gone from 12 years vegan. And sometimes, again, you don't put the things together. Like you were saying your story, I'm like, I broke my back in college after becoming a vegetarian. Didn't figure out it was because of that until like 2 years ago. I went, oh my God. In an interview with Sean Baker, I went, that's why I broke my back. I can't believe I didn't figure that out till right now. Was because of, my diet for 14 years. And it took a very long time of getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And like you said, a doctor to kind of say, you can't do this anymore. You must eat meat was really hard on the system to accept, right? Like, what? And here I am, for some years, like kind of carnivore, super animal based now. And I totally get it. I mean, but how the emotion can manipulate you into same books, read the same thing, same journey, it's like the same. And there's so many of us. And like now, almost 50, did over a decade of that kind of damage, destroyed my hormones, destroyed my body, and I'm rebuilding and I'm recovering. And it's not easy and it is more work. My eye on Friday just developed like some crazy kind of red pain, pink eye issue. I'm like, what is happening in my eye? I had to take my contacts out and I thought to myself, did I put DMSO accidentally? Like, what is going on? And I'm looking at it, it's a little bit like, it's not really pink eye, but it's irritating and it's hurting and it's kind of like puffy and it's pink. I'm like, oh my God. And the irony that I'm talking to you, I'm like, what if I'm having oxalate dumping? What if that's what's happening? And that's the thing. I don't actually know, but
Let me give you a
maybe that
couple
is what's
tips
going
on
on.
this because, well, there's like 3 general ways to push oxalates out of the body, but there's more than 3. But you can think of them as 3. Like the urine does it. And if the kidneys are pushing out urine that's full of crystals and it's slightly calcium crystal, oxalate crystals, clumpy slightly, you'll get cloudy urine. So sometimes if you have a day of malaise or red eyes or weird stuff going on, and you just like sometimes that neuroinflammation makes you a person who's very negative, who's anxious or
Yes, that was
demoralized.
Friday and Saturday. Miserable
Yes,
person. Miserable.
yes. So that's a classic oxalate dumping sign where you go
Okay.
all Eeyore and you're like, oh my God, this
Couldn't get
terrible,
out of bed.
yeah. And then you don't know what to do with your day, and every little to-do list is overwhelming. And
Horrible.
then
I could
you're
do nothing.
clumsy
I
and
was
you just
miserable.
cannot you feel like some kind of teenager on drugs. Like you just don't have it together. And that's oxalate, that's that neuroinflammation. So that's a great symptom. Then look for, do you have the cloudy urine, a day later or 2 days later, or do you get tartar on the teeth? This is the saliva is concentrating oxalate. So you'll see more tartar on the teeth often when it goes up in the bloodstream. Sometimes you'll get grit on the eyes where your eyelids might even like sort of glue shut by morning time, where you get some little grit on your cheekbones in the morning.
I do
That's
get that, yeah.
oxalate coming out. So some people get the gritty stools where they're really able to turn on these transporters in their colon. They're putting out oxalate and it's coming out as a sandy grit. You might notice it is uncomfortable to pass through the rectum and anus. You might end up with hemorrhoids or burning. Sometimes the grit is kind of sandy colored like a sesame color, or in the other times it's black, usually a mix of little black specks, little tiny sandy specks that offers some kind of unpleasantness in the BM process, that oxalate dumping. A lot of us are not skin dumpers. These people have these visual pictures of stuff coming out of their skin. I have a few of them on my Instagram page. I've never seen that anywhere on my body. When people started telling me this, I was like, you gotta be kidding. What? I was just like, no. But I hear it all the time. And I think I might have one little crystal sitting right here on the edge of my eye that just doesn't come out. Although today I can't feel it, but it's been sitting there for like 2 years.
Oh,
This
wow.
little spot that hurts. So my
So
skin
that's
is,
what people are asking. It's like, how long? How long? Because I'll see people talk about one
right.
is like, how long if you're working with somebody, are they going to start feeling better? And then maybe you need to go through, like, I draw a picture for them, like, here, like, health is not linear. I try to say, you're not going to go from year to year like that. It's like this.
It's up and down and up and down and
Yeah.
up and down, because the body turns on these inflammation periods to try to drill out these crystals out of your tissues, which is quite unpleasant. You think of it as a microsurgery with no anesthetic. It's like ripping up the roads and having a construction site to live in. It's not a pretty picture to fix yourself. There's a lot of drama and work. It takes energy. You might get, spikes in hunger, even like your body's. If you get a big spike in hunger where you could eat an inanimate object, then you may be heading for one of these dumping cycles where you could be laid flat and feel bad. So you have to expect, I say the first 3 years is a pretty bumpy ride, but some people don't start dumping until their 3rd year on carnivore. You can do several years on carnivore and low oxalate diet, and your body isn't able to get to that yet because it's doing other work that needs to be done, or it doesn't have enough calcium, or doesn't have enough something to get to the clearing. So everybody's different. There's no one way to do it. But I think if you've really filled yourself up with oxalate crystals, you have a chronic disease that's going to last most of your life. And it's going to take 10 years of active clearing for a lot of us to really be out of the sense that we're still oxalate poisoned. But I don't think, like for me, my spine is, I'm sure, still loaded with oxalate crystals. And I'm in my 9th year. And I feel like there's a long more to go. And the best analogy I can find in the medical literature is how the body retains a tattoo. Okay. So you would think when you put toxic ink under the skin of a body that the body would flush, shed it off with the skin and just grow new skin and push this tattoo out with the old dying skin. But that's not what happens. You get to keep your tattoo for decades, and really you die in a coffin. You still got your tattoos. So why didn't the tattoo go away? It's because each little micro blob of ink is being held in a immune cell, comes along, and these phagocytes bring it inside themselves and hold on to it to protect the other tissues around it. So the skin cells are being protected and they can grow off and still be skin, but the monocyte is holding that blob of ink. And then when that cell dies after a year or whatever, a new one comes along and sucks up that blob of ink and holds it right there so that the local cells don't get damaged. So you have no symptoms from your tattoo, but the immune system is working hard to protect your skin so your skin isn't damaged and to keep you from having an allergy to the tattoo ink, because otherwise you would turn on chronic problems with the immune system. And about 12% of people with tattoos get an allergy to tattoo ink eventually. But some of that same process is going on with oxalates, where the body is deliberately containing it in a way that makes it hard to move it out, because it has to do that so that the local tissues are still fine.
Wow. See, I never knew about that whole that analogy was amazing. I'm going to clip that right to the front of this interview on YouTube.
Yeah,
Good.
I have done a lot of digging in the medical literature, because this is a head scratcher. There's a million questions. Everybody wants answers to questions as if God handed to somebody on a silver platter, and that's not how it works. We have to study these things, and I have to dig up what little is out there that's been studied, and surprised to see how much is there that explains all this. So I can confidently say these things like, this is real. Mm-hmm. And it's not a problem you want to have. You do not want to fill yourself up with toxic microparticles. Right. This is a very bad thing to do,
though,
and
Sally,
you're doing it.
Everybody has. Yeah. I mean, we've been doing it. Like you said, those are the vegetables we consume very heavily. There's been a sharp increase in the last 10 years. I mean, I gave my son almond milk. He's 16. And now when I bring real milk in from the cows, the raw milk, A2, he doesn't want to drink it. He's like, what's the deal? I'm like, just, can you stop? He's like, but it says it's not for human consumption. I'm like, okay, that's just a Georgia law problem. I'm like, that's not real. You know what I mean? Like, oh, like, you know?
Well, he's 16.
So,
He knows everything, and he learned from the best, didn't he? I have
Sally,
a
help me.
mom whose
Can I hire
6-year-old,
you
her
to
6-year-old
make
is addicted to almond milk. She raised her 6-year-old on almond milk, and it's been really tough to convince her that real milk is okay, or, you know, she doesn't like the taste of it. She's so trained. Food is a learned thing. We've learned all these food things. They're not innate.
It's a tough balance. Let me tell you, I specialize in autism. My nephew has autism. GAPS diet, my patients is what I was trained in from all the GAPS diets, geneticists. I have had celiac, so I haven't had gluten in 17 years. And you're told no dairy. Absolutely no gluten, dairy. It hits the gene code the same, blah, 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 blah. I think that's not actually accurate because we're looking at pasteurized, homogenized,
Right.
usually A1 casein. And when you realize that, you're like, wait a minute, I don't think we're right. But I did the best I could with information. My nephew's 25, and I was trained by everybody,
It was
20
hard to
years ago.
find raw milk 25 years ago. It really was.
Yeah, so it's like now I'm bringing, so now I'm telling patients like, hang on, I want us to get the dairy back in here. But I have to bring the inflammation down. I have to heal the gut. And, it does take layers to see if they're going to be reactive, because I'm a big fan of all the dairy and the eggs. But like I said, sometimes if I have an extremely devastated system, like ulcerative colitis or something, I've got to clean it up. But I usually get them all on everything natural again, all the primal foods. So you guys, it's been over an hour, Sally. I really want to respect your time. I mean, you're just a encyclopedia on this information, but she's got all this on her website, you guys. You can take a private course with her, and you can hire her and buy her books and do all the things. I know a little bit about oxalates. I do help my patients with it, but whenever I hit a wall, I go, let me be real clear. I think we have a bigger issue. I'm going to send you to Sally K. Norton, because that's what she does, and she does it better than me. And I'm not going to talk recipes with you because I don't care about cooking. I just don't want to do it at all. That's why, again, I like carnivore. I'm like, what? You just make a steak. Give us a recipe.
Yeah, it's
Salt.
made me a really lazy cook, I have to say. I used to
So,
be a very
I mean,
fancy.
I don't.
Every night in my
burger.
house, there was a salad, 3 vegetables, and a meat entree. And now I'm just doing mostly meat, and I've become really lazy. But my whole life, I was going to write a cookbook. It was going to be vegetarian for a long time. And so, yeah, I know how my way around the kitchen. I enjoy that very much. And a lot of people need a little brush up on cooking. So, yeah, there's a lot of really fundamental tips, too, in my book.
Yeah, and if you like it, you're a foodie, and it is a connection activity. I get it. I just was kind of treated like one of the boys and never had to do it, and I like that status in my family, so I'm going to stick with it. I'm 49. I've yet to cook a holiday meal, and yet I'll host all the holidays, but I got somebody else cooking for them all the time. Yeah, I'll date a chef in a minute. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just date chefs.
Man. Yeah, a chef who's good on the computer would be a good combination.
Yeah, right. All right, Sally, anything you
Lovely
want
to hang
add?
out with you.
You
Thanks
too.
for
Is
your
there anything
interest
you want to add to them? Like, you got something coming up?
Well, we've got the book coming out, and if you're interested in mentoring people, you really should come to my group classes and kind of meet the community. And
Okay.
The book's being held by the publisher until December 29th. But that book's going to have so much packed into it that's going to help you understand it yourself and tell the story.
And that's the Toxic Superfoods book, right? Is that
Toxic
the title?
Superfoods. Yeah, you can pre-order it now. Tell the publisher you want this book. By pre-ordering it, they're only publishing so many physical copies. I think they're expecting a lot of ebooks and audiobooks to sell.
So where do I do that? Where do I get that link so I can help promote it?
I can send you the link to the publisher's page that shows you all the places, every outlet in the world that's like Amazon and all the booksellers. Every place that sells books can get this book.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If you do that, Sally, I will make sure it gets in the description on here and on YouTube and in our newsletter and everything. I want to help support and build you as much as I can.
It's good to get
you
this
guys doing
message
the
out.
research.
Thank you.
Yeah, the guys like you doing this kind of all this reading of the papers, so I don't have to. I deeply appreciate it.
It's a full-time plus job.
I
And just
know.
every little thing, like arbitrating the data and trying to figure out what is the answer to like oatmeal or whatever, that wipes out a whole weekend where the lawn isn't getting mowed. And there's a lot of opportunity cost to spending all your time trying to solve a puzzle. And so the book took a lot to pull it together to make it short enough and digestible for the public. And so I'm hoping that's going to help us do something about this big disaster of raising children on high oxalate foods. It's going to give them a lifetime of suffering. I would really like to not have any more human suffering than is necessary. And this is something we can fix easy.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Sally. Thank you for your time. And I'll have all of this information down there, you guys. Thank you. Have a good one. Okay.
Bye everybody.